Hello! This week's Dvar Torah takes us to the 4th chapter of the Torah, which is the story of Cain and Abel, Cain and Hevel. It's a very, very strange story, one that's extremely familiar because it's been immortalised in literature and films, even if you're not so familiar with the text. It starts off that Adam and Eve are post the sin in the garden, which happened in the previous chapter. They've been expelled from the garden and they're finding their way. And they have 2 sons, one called Cain and one called Hevel. They're odd names. Cain is called Cain because she, Chava, Eve, names him Konisi es Hashem, after the fact she's acquired a man with God in some sense. And then the second son, Hevel, also a very strange name. Hevel means vanity or emptiness, most odd name to call a child. And we discover that Hevel was a shepherd, but Cain was an agriculturist, Oved Adomos, someone who worked the ground. And we'll pick up the story in verse 3. It was after some time, Cain brought from the fruits of the ground as an offering to God. The rabbi seen the phrase from the fruits of the ground, something inconsequential, a bit of leftovers, if you like, from his dinner. But he has the idea of bringing an offering to God. V'Hevel, hevi gam hu b'choret sonim l'chavem. But Hevel, in contrast, although he copied, he improved the model and he brought the very best of his flock. He was a shepherd after all. And then we discover Vayishar Shem el Hevel ve'emin chosoi, that the Lord turned to Hevel and his offering. God favoured Hevel's offering, but to Cain and his offering God did not turn. God ignored it. And the consequence was Cain became extremely angry, and he was crestfallen, or depressed, you might even translate it. And God addresses Cain and says, why are you angry? Why are you upset? And now 2 verses, which are extremely difficult, and Arcane Robert Alter, in his recent translation, points out that they are difficult to translate, difficult poetry, but they define what happens. Haloim tativ se'es. Is it not that if you do good, se'es means perhaps be lifted up, elevated, be transformed in some way? But if you do not do good, sin crouches at the entrance of what? Its desire shall be towards you, but you can rule over it. So there are many attempts to understand what this verse means. Let me read the next and then we'll come back and explain. Cain said to Hevel, his brother, but he didn't say anything. There's no speech recorded, and instead, it was while they were out in the field. Cain arose against Hevel, his brother, and he killed him. The first murder in history. And then God says to him, where's Hevel, your brother? He said, I don't know, or more correctly, I haven't known. It's in the past tense. Hashema ochi anochi, perhaps one of the most famous phrases in the entire Bible. Am I my brother's keeper? Now, in a short Dvar Torah, there isn't time to explore all the nuances of the language. But Rashi understands that the first verse, is it not that if you make your deeds good, then you'll be successful, and if not, the consequences will wait for you at the end of your life? Rashi understands that God is saying to Cain, don't be upset, don't be depressed, you made a mistake this time, you didn't do the right thing, but it can be rectified, you're a human being with free choice, and in the end, what happens to you will be decided by your choices, by your judgment. Sin, the desire to do wrong, will always be with you, but you can overcome it. But then mysteriously, Cain says we don't know what to Hevel, and then kills him in the field. And Rashi does not really offer an explanation other than to say that it means that he engaged him in conversation. They got into an argument, they started fighting, and Cain killed him. The Malbim, writing in the mid-19th century, adopts a slightly similar tack, but goes in a direction which I think is rich and complex and is the core message of this passage. The Malbim understands that God's address to Cain should be read like this. Haloi im tetiv se'es. Se'es here refers to an offering. Vim lo se'tiv. And it should be read as follows. Whether or not you make good your offering, or you don't. In the end, it's not about appeasing God, about bringing offerings that are empty. It's about your behaviour. And ultimately, the offering is somewhat incidental to the ability of a human being to improve himself or herself. And since we have free will, we can enjoy the positive consequences, but we'll also be responsible for the negative consequences. God says to Cain, you have free will, and in the end, trying to appease me by bringing an offering will never do. If you're going to bring an offering, do it the right way, but it's not the way to build a relationship with God or to develop as a human being. According to the Malbim, this enables us to understand the difficult verse. Vayomer Cain el Hevel Ochiv, Cain said to Hevel, his brother, without explaining what he says. According to the Malbim's genius explanation, Cain listens to God, and Cain thinks there's a force that olecho teshukosoi, to you as its desire, but you can overcome it. He doesn't understand as God intends that he's referring to an internal struggle that perhaps already entered human beings when they ate from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. It's now internalized as part of the human condition, and that the good should overcome the bad. Instead, he understood it to mean something external. Something external is out to get you, and you can overpower it and thereby win the battle. And Cain looks around and he sees Hevel, his brother. And so the way to translate this is, Cain said means said in his heart. He was thinking, I know, God must be talking about El Hevel Ochiv with respect to Hevel, his brother. And as a result, he thought God was instructing him to kill him. Of course, it's a terrible misunderstanding. God is requiring Cain to overcome his inner desires, to recognise that we all go wrong, that we fail, and we can succeed. And when we fail, we will try again. And that is the nature of the human experience. And this is why God says to him, where's Hevel, your brother? He's your brother. He's the same as you. You've made a catastrophic mistake. And then when Cain eventually replies, he said, Godoil avoini minsoy, my sin is too great to bear. I've made the most catastrophic existential error. And so this story is powerful, profound, often misunderstood, but conveys the centrality of free will in the human condition, God's expectations of man, and what happens when, rather than blaming oneself for what things go wrong and focusing on self-improvement, one blames outside forces, in this case, the terrible mistake that Cain made, transforming the course of human history. Good Shabbos and sei gesund und stark.